I opened my eyes to morning sunlight pouring through the window. I felt well rested, although a subtle noise is what interrupted me from sleeping any longer. I turned to my side, and a young man with pink hair lay with his back to me. So it was all real. He turned over to face me and stare at me, his groggy eyes still red in the iris. He must have been awakened by the same noise as me. After that, it didn't take long for me to regain my senses and become fully conscious. When one has lived in a house for so long, one develops strange new senses. As faint of a sound as it was, I was aware that someone was banging on our front door. It persisted without end. If the moth were aware of what I did last night, I must have beaten them before they could carry out their twisted goals. I saved Carol and Otis before harm came their way. The moth came to arrest me. I did what was right, but I made a big mistake. I betrayed my comrades, who betrayed me. My life as a cop was over. That's how the cookie crumbles. I would have to resist arrest and protect my family from the authorities. Well, my sister and her weird demonic sheep friend sleeping next to me. I jumped out of bed, assembled my uniform, grabbed my sword in its sheath, and took my time walking downstairs to approach the front door. A bloody battle was upon me now, or so I thought, until I heard an aggressive yet comforting voice muffled on the other side of the door. Count, Carol, please open the door. It's me. Relief filled me. I had no doubt that by the tone of his demand, Noah came to explain everything to me. Maybe he would embrace me and cry. It's okay, Mr. Account. It was all a misunderstanding. I rushed to open the door and was betrayed by both expectations and routine. He walked right inside, closed the door behind himself, and did nothing more than bow, hang his head low, and put both hands on each side of my shoulders. I came before anyone else could. He spoke breathlessly with an unease I hadn't known from him. What you did, because you're related to Carol? They knew it had to be because of you. The soldiers who got her didn't know she was related to another member of the moth. They were coming for you, but I stopped them. His thick hands clenched my shoulders tight. You took her back, but you freed him too, didn't you? So Carol and I made a bad decision after all. Him? Otis? Otis, is that his name? We treated him like a government property and never bothered to address him by name. It turned out I wasn't ignorant to both my relief and my increased worry. The latter dominated the former. Noah's grip loosened and he brushed his hands down my arms before removing himself from me. He adjusted his posture and continued to speak in a manner much sterner and more professional. The big boss, wasn't particularly happy with what you did, but I offered him his usual vodka, talked a little sense into him, and persuaded him into letting it slide. I know a lot of his unhappiness is from the stress of hunting after other things, and probably his pet bear getting loose too. That bear, I wouldn't have thought the two could be separated. I didn't know much about the boss of our organization other than he seemed fond of animals. In particular, he was often seen around town performing elegant dances with a grizzly bear. He's somehow tamed. The same could have been said about any citizen, though after peeking into the bizarre penitentiary, I wasn't so sure the boss was any different from the average owner of a beast. On that note, I wasn't sure how many people were aware that the performer and the king of Enonia were the same person. His inhuman student is the one who takes all the credit after all. I doubted he would pile a bunch of animals together along with prisoners in such an isolated location for the sake of adding to his circus. But given how quirky he was, and how strange the moth was now, there were some questions to be raised. Things have been a little rough for the moth, under the boss's frustration, of course. He would give out some harsh orders over this. But that's under the rug now. I want to stay calm. Not only may Noah have been protecting me, but he's also sheltering me. We should talk today. Footsteps crept up from behind me along with each creak of the staircase. Oh, Carol, it's good to see you. His tone shifted from cold to warm in an instant as he looked over my shoulder. Noah? Though I knew from her attitude before going to bed last night that she couldn't have been too scarred by the incident, her voice lacked the enthusiasm she tended to greet Noah with. What happened? There was a misunderstanding. Well, I wasn't entirely wrong. Did they think Otis and I are criminals? He let out a grunt. There's been something going on, and they mistook you for the wrong person. An explanation as vague as that had to partially be a lie. I trusted Noah with my safety, but it may have been too much to trust him with the truth. They better have. Carol turned from the two of us and went to the kitchen. She was persistent for an answer, but the silence she formed could have indicated the beginning of a dissonance between her and Noah that I had never seen before. She reached into the cabinets all around her and tinkered with the nearby appliances, turned back to me and Noah, leaned back against the counter, and spoke. What about Otis? What is Otis? He sympathized with him while sharing my confusion. He's something else, that's for sure. The stairs creaked behind me as heavy footsteps resounded from them. As I turned around, Otis came into view, rubbing his eyes while approaching me. As his gaze widened, he then let out a yelp and cowered behind me. There was only one thing he could have reacted to. Otis? Otis, it's fine. He's not like the other soldiers. He's here to help us. Not knowing of another way to calm him, I turned to him and placed both my hands on his broad shoulders. He stared back at me directly in the eyes. The red in his iris almost seemed to glow. A moment of awkward silence ensued as we remained still, while Carol and Noah watched from afar. I didn't know what to do from here until more words came to mind, and I took a hand off Otis to gesture towards Carol and Noah. This guy here is like another part of my family. Noah's never let me down. If you can trust me to bust you out of jail, then you can trust him to keep you out. I wouldn't have freed you just to let you get taken captive again. I might have made a promise I couldn't keep as I spewed the most comforting words that came to mind. Noah gave the two a big smile. Why don't we all have a seat together? Noah moved over to the coffee table and seated himself. I promptly followed and sat across from him with Otis in tow behind me. Carol then approached us. and set a mug before each of us with a faint smile on her face, to then sit with a cup in hand beside Noah. "Oh, how kind of you." I took the mug and took a sip to have a few of my burdens lifted again at the full-bodied taste of hot tea. Noah sipped at the drink before him, and his face brightened even further. "Hot chocolate is your favorite, isn't it, Noah?" "You know me well." A moment of peaceful silence passed as the three of us sipped at our own beverages, though Otis had yet to taste his. Everyone was likely afraid to bring up anything that could come off as insensitive to Otis, but the silence was far from awkward. "Where did you get this, or how did you make this? You learned a thing or two from your job, huh?" "It's so bitter and different. I think it's almost like what coffee would taste like if coffee were any good." Carol let out a grunt as if to take offense to his statement. "I'll have to drink this again sometime." "How about yours, Otis?" Otis finally spoke up after all this time just for the sake of making mundane conversation with Carol again. "Well, what did you give me?" "Try it." He lifted the mug off the table and took a sip, then gave off a pained expression as he went into shock and forced himself to swallow to refrain from spewing everywhere. I hope he didn't think we were trying to poison him. "Don't worry, you're not the first. It's so strong, but there's also a lot of sweetness to it. I don't know how I feel about it." "Oh, do you like your coffee black?" "You know, you can't get everyone to like coffee." She grunted again. "Carol, speaking of which, are you late for work?" "Well, because you shouldn't worry about that. After last night, you should really take today off." Now it was my sister's turn to become a sheltered slacker. "He's right. You should hang around here, get some rest, and make sure Otis does the same." "I suppose that wouldn't be bad. Then I'll get to know what it feels like to be a count for a day." I exhaled out my nose into an almost empty mug, making a sound that resounded throughout the room. "But tomorrow, I'll make sure you can get right back at it again. We all need some rest from time to time, but nothing ever got better by staying holed up inside all day. I won't let you be put in harm's way again." "You're the best, Noah." "Would you really let me stay here for longer?" "You don't have anywhere else to go, right?" "That's true." "As for you, I'll see to it that you hopefully won't stay stuck in here too." "You will?" "It's been a part of my job to help people in trouble. Some other members of the mob may think differently from me, but I'll hold on to my values. The Count and I will get to that after we go to do our job together now." "You're leaving a Count?" Otis sounded heartbroken. Was he going to miss me already? "I mean, I have to do my job." I figured now was the time he wanted to leave to discuss matters in more detail, away from Otis and Carol. Like me, a part of him must not have wanted to offend Otis or to worry Carol. "I say it was a part of his job to free you from the people who mistreated you, Otis. And we're going to keep working towards that." It comforted me to know he was still on my side regardless of whatever the mob had up their sleeves, and that I made him proud after all. If these were the words he chose, that meant I also needed to have a little faith in Otis. "Have you taken a liking to a Count?" "If he went out of his way to free me in spite of whatever the mob said, he's gotta be a good person. I just don't know how I'll repay him. Noah closed his eyes as a heavy silence pervaded the room. It's been a lovely morning, but now is about the time Account and I should depart. Thanks for the drink again, Carol. A part of me found myself warming up to Otis as he warmed up to me. The more Noah encouraged his freedom, the more I wanted to abide by Noah's earnest and selfless wish. You two behave yourselves. Not a problem. Noah and I walked through the streets of the city on foot, not heading in any particular direction. It came close to the end of another uneventful day I was thankful for, but, like last night, there was no guarantee it would stay uneventful. Today lacked the fun of yesterday. Things were not all at peace in my mind, and Noah's face lacked a cheery smile. You did the right thing, Account. I'm relieved you didn't wait any later to free Carol. What were they gonna do to her? I can't say for sure, but I think I have an idea. There was no reason to select her specifically. I learned only after the fact that several days ago a squadron seized a couple in their own home without warning, potentially orphaning their only child. They were innocent. At least that's what I believe. That couple and your sister were both chosen at random, out of convenience. The mob hasn't been thinking with justice in mind lately. This was the organization I dedicated the last 2 years of my life to. This whole time, I was working to protect the innocent only for them to be used as tools. Why is all of this? There was a pause before his next line. He waited to blurt anything out, choosing his words carefully, though nothing was enough to make the response easing. I can't say for sure about that couple, but I know what happened to your sister has to do with Otis. Before I could strain my mind on it any longer, a group of soldiers came into view from around the corner and shouted at us. Mr. Tolstoy, come here, there's been an outbreak. Without glancing at me, Noah sprinted towards the group and I followed. The excitement Noah spoke of yesterday came earlier than I expected. We all turned at the corner and witnessed a scene of the likes I hadn't seen before. Several mob soldiers were strung across the road, some lying on the ground and moaning in pain, while others slumped over in an awkward position, motionless. Trails of blood colored the streets in contrasting red. Carry off the ones who are alive and get them help. We sent most of the remaining troops present to chase after the culprit. This happened a few minutes ago. The culprit? This was the work of one person? Yes, but there was another with him. Tolstoy, have you heard of what happened today? I had other business to attend to. What's going on? Noah was the last slacker to complete the picture. Our last scout, entrusted with the device, got it stolen by a young dark-haired girl. Our forces have been after her all day. You sent someone to use the device outside of the designated premises? Why? The boss issued a command to take every action necessary to retrieve the Ovine Replica, knowing that Novos would resist. Was that the code name they gave to Otis? This couldn't get any weirder. I wish Noah hadn't left me in the dark until now. Or was it his fault? Was it my own fault? I never got any of the memos, but I always checked my mailbox pretty thoroughly. Was Noah supposed to give the memos to me? Did I somehow miss a few meetings? You're all a bunch of idiots. Noah yelled at the other soldiers with frightening rage as he shook his fist and stomped the ground. I was glad to have never been on the receiving end of his bad side. The soldier stuttered as he continued his report. It seems she has an accomplice now. Upon trying to investigate her, a large man with frazzled hair who was accompanying her snatched a sword from us and took down most of the squadron. I'm getting too old for this. Well, while you dumbasses lost a device over Mr. Account here, we've developed our own plan. Silence filled the air as Noah knelt down to one of the corpses on the street. I think he's going to be very useful to us from now on. Excuse me? I kept getting drafted into things I never signed up for. Roll with it. I'm on your side. All of a sudden, with those words, I had never trusted Noah more. He merely attempted to appeal to the other soldiers. Tomorrow, you'll be our new scout. The few other soldiers let out a gasp. Is that possible? No one in the mob has been able to accomplish that before. You were fools for keeping that kid captive. As much as I liked Noah, I was getting sick of being left out, so I confronted him. Noah, tell me what's going on. He stood up, turned to face me, and put a hand on my shoulder. I have a job for you tomorrow. At worst, it may be a little unpleasant, but at best, you'll be fine. We hope for the best around these parts. Otis doesn't deserve to be locked up, in jail, or in your house. You should take the time to get to know him. You two are going scouting. Oh shit. There had to be something Noah refused to tell me, but this secrecy began to harm me more than help me. As much as I appreciated him, my thoughts of him weren't as welcoming as they were a few days ago. It became difficult for me to imagine myself approaching him or confessing anything to him. I was at least satisfied that he found the energy to embrace me again before he left me at the end of the day, but it lacked the joy and enthusiasm that routine had entrusted me. Although Noah's arms were wrapped around me as tightly as usual, and for a long time, it was a solemn embrace. I didn't have the courage to put my arms around him in turn, but I didn't resist in the slightest, hopefully showing that his affection wasn't rejected. I wonder if he were to touch me another time, if it would be with a vigor that would reawaken my own happiness. I never reciprocated his care. Perhaps it was time for me to begin so I could express myself. Maybe that's all it took. I turned to Otis to see he lay still with his back against me. Either he fell asleep with all too much ease, or he was honestly relieved to be in a proper bed. I told him earlier about tomorrow's plan, but without much elaboration. There wasn't much to elaborate on, seeing that no one left me on an equally vague note. Otis seemed excited at the fact that he would be neither in captivity nor in hiding. Whatever would happen, it was the faintest relief to know he was hopeful for his own circumstances. I hadn't known him for long, but I wanted to make sure he was at least fine, if that was something still in my power. I was awakened, not by a noise, but by sunlight shining through my window once again. I was quick to rise to my feet, wanting to feel prepared for the day. I got ready by assembling my belongings. The first thought that infiltrated my mind on a day like today was the work that awaited me. This time it was an honorable task revered among the force's other members, scouting. I had no idea what that meant. Upon finishing preparations and looking to Otis, he was still motionless on the bed. I made my way over to him and shook him. He opened his eyes and looked at me. I'm already set. You want to come to work with me? He sprung onto his feet, shaking the room. Of course! This is gonna be exciting! I wouldn't say it's that exciting, at least I hope it's not. You hope this isn't a dangerous mission, right? All Noah told us to do was walk around the cities together. I guess you're free of any criminal charges now. So a date. It's been a long time since I had a chance to do that. If you really managed to convince all of the mob to let me walk around in the open again, you're amazing, account. It wasn't really me who was in charge. You're in touch with the right people, though, and let me tell you something now. You're in touch with another right person. You had my back, now I have yours. I wasn't sure if this was something he could deliver, but I accepted his offer. Noah was the one who insisted, after all. Thanks. He slipped on his shoes and followed me as I walked out the bedroom door and down the stairs. Arriving in the living room, we encountered Carol puttering in the kitchen area. Good morning, guys. Morning, Carol. You're going out with a count today. Don't word this in a way that makes it seem like something more than it is. You could say so. He turned to us and eyed Otis from top to bottom. You don't look very prepared for an outing. Are you saying something's wrong with the way I'm dressed? Carol had too critical of an eye for fashion for my liking. It's a little more than the clothes. Do you think it's a good idea that he goes out in public with things like the horns exposed? I don't know how people would react, but how do you suggest we solve that? She put a hand to her chin and thought. Oh, I have an idea. She then reached her hands behind her head to untie the bright red bow that was positioned in her hair for decoration, or then to maintain a hairstyle. She readjusted it, stretched its edges, and placed it upon Otis's head, where it was kept in place by his now concealed horns. She took a step back to assess the aesthetic change. It's lovely, don't you think so, Count? In an instant, anything that could have been seen as monstrous or unapproachable about Otis was nullified. A touch of feminine grace bestowed upon him contrasts with his masculinity, but without diminishing his identity. As much justice as that bow was done by Carol, if so, I simply thought by association I had to admit it suited him. It works. You think so? He squeezed his eyes shut and gave off a beaming smile while tilting his head amused by the compliments received. I felt a burning sensation in my face. Yeah. I'm not sure what to do about the hair. It's awfully attention-grabbing. This day and age is a time when the youth expresses a superficial sense of individuality, like so. It'll blend in fine. Just the other day I saw a kid strolling by with hair dyed bright orange and white, attention-grabbing but harmless. I suppose that's true. Even so, he still needs something more than that shirt. It's a little cold outside. Let me check in the closet for something. Carol stepped over to a nearby closet and peered into it, searching for something to accompany Otis' outfit. We hardly ever use this closet. He reached in and pulled out a tall jacket on a hanger. Ah, this was Dad's, wasn't it? It may be a tad tight on you, but I bet it will work. Otis took the jacket as it was handed to him and slipped it on. This was the first time in years that I saw anyone with that jacket, but I remembered my father wearing it often, making it one of his personal trademarks. Alright, I think you're set. Just then, there was a knock at the door, thankfully much less violent and incessant than the banging yesterday morning. I approached the door to open it. As I expected, Noah stood in the doorway before me. As I couldn't predict, he didn't thrust his open arms around me. Glad to see you again, Mr. Account. He made a genuine effort to be friendly, but he was far from excited. It was a calm professional composure, like throughout the duration of yesterday. Even so, the smile he maintained is what gave me the faintest relief. Are you ready for today? I hope so. Otis and Carol walked up from behind. Hopefully, everyone at the fortune teller will forgive my absence. I talked to them. They said they were worried about you. That's more than I can say about most of my coworkers. I'll set everything straight for you. But once I'm done there, I have some of my own work to do. I'll entrust you to a guard or a few who I know won't let you down. You're sure about that? If anyone messes up again, they're getting their asses beat. We all walked out into the sunlight street, and I shut the door behind us. We then walked as a group through the streets on our way to the fortune teller. Carol and Noah talked with each other, with Otis speaking up on occasion, while I remained silent. It was like how things were, now with an extra member. 3 was a crowd for me, but I didn't mind Otis' added presence. When I wasn't sure if Carol and Noah noticed me, Otis noticed my silence and asked for my input at certain parts of the conversation. You've dealt with some of these so-called criminals too, right, Account? A time or two. Maybe he drew too much attention to me, or maybe he complimented my own presence. Carol had long since accepted Otis, and while Noah seemed welcoming to him, I wasn't sure what Noah thought of him. Don't sell yourself short. It's been more than a few times. But he also helped me. I had an idea what Otis was insinuating. I only arrested people who I caught red-handed, people who did bad things. So if you were around, you would have stopped the soldiers who took me away, wouldn't you? I was there to fix that whole deal. I may have claimed too much credit, but that wasn't too skewed of a statement. And if things get bad again, who'll fix it again? Earlier, Noah insisted I take a break. Now, though I understood he was only trying to give Otis assurance, he insisted I work more. Even so, he gave me mixed messages. What I couldn't catch a break from is this fluctuation was confusion. We arrived in front of the fortune teller. I'll take care of Carol from here before I head out on my own way. You two should head out yourselves. You're going to leave. Take out criminals, right? Real criminals? There was a hint of doubt and accusation in Carol's tone. There's been a dangerous one lurking around. I need to keep all of you safe. You don't want me to come with you? Hey, I said you shouldn't worry about me. Nothing's gonna stand in my way. Though he was still setting me up for an easier life, concern for his well-being further fulfilled my mind. Carol, dear, would you mind making a hot chocolate to go? I'll be behind you in a second. Sure thing. Before walking through the door, Carol turned back to face the group. Noah, an account? Do your best. Her stare shifted to a simple smile. She turned back to the door and entered the building. Remind me again what I'm even doing? You'll patrol the city, like always. If anything goes wrong, I or another soldier will signal for you. Until then, assuming anything happens at all, relax. Relax, huh? Well, there is one more assignment I need to give you. I was wrong of me to hope for clarity concerning these events, but even so, a desire for elaboration was always in the back of my mind. Don't listen to the words of anyone. Make a decision your own. My curiosity was reaching its peak. You have the power to change the world. Stay safe and take good care of Otis, alright? Don't tell me the one person I put my faith in went crazy too. Even then, I couldn't bring myself to proclaim any of the absurdity of this situation to his face. All I knew, trust him. If anything happens without me, I'm counting on you. See you later, Mr. Account. Yeah. I couldn't make myself damage or routine than it had been either, and gave the usual response. As I waved to him, he waved back and gave off the brightest smile I had seen from him in a while. That gave me the energy I needed to go on for the no matter what else he had told me. He entered the coffee shop, leaving me and Otis alone in the street. It didn't take long for Otis to bring up pressing matters. But account, aren't we gonna eat something? Well, I turned my head to the door of the coffee shop, then turned to look at Otis in the eyes. I could stick around, pester everyone, and in turn be teased by Carol about running from duty. Or I could walk alone with Otis, getting part of my so-called assignment out of the way until we found a different place to eat. Now, rather than continuing to bother Noah, I might have a chance to learn something about Otis from none other than himself in our newfound solitude together. There are a few other places around here. We'll walk around and find something. And so we began our stroll through the streets of the city. Your sister's awfully good at cooking, though. You should give some other things a try. You said you're from around here, right? Don't you know of any good places? Not really. I haven't gone out to eat much. I predicted he wasn't too unlike me. There was a chance that he could have been just as poor as I was before I enlisted into the Moth. In rescuing him, I may have even saved him from poverty. So I thought for a second before dismissing the idea, as I caught another glimpse of him. Not in this part of the city. At least, it's an awfully big place, you know? Then I'll give you a treat. However, if his appearance always held beastly traits, that must have made it hard for him to live a normal life. The question of his identity gnawed at the back of my mind, but I didn't want to be rude. My character was already cold enough, and if anything, I didn't want to dampen his welcoming attitude. Sailor. I gave him occasional glances as we walked, wanting to assess him, double-checking if the circumstances I fell into were still real, but I couldn't stare too long as I had to watch where I was walking. This was made easier as I found myself slowing my rushed pace down to an unhurried stroll. To keep his side, compared to Noah's attention for action, Otis had a steady gait which tested my patience. I was reminded that the objective at hand was not to accomplish things, but to hope nothing happened. I accepted that I could learn from Otis. I began to wonder if Carol would come to criticize him too, or if I would stay her easy target. I wasn't as quick to dismiss the thought of him coming from an impoverished background, as I was quick to reach that conclusion as I steadied my pace to glance at him. Not feeling adventurous, I was unconsciously following a route I often took to reach a building that stood out from the drab structures surrounding it. The sign above the door said, Joybringer. This is a nice place. Noah and I come here from time to time. Taking any other man here might as well have been sacrilege. Though I doubted Noah saw the habit as something sacred like It was the mere fact that I had spent time here with Noah that made it special. Not to say that it wasn't any less special now, rather I was passing that sentimentality onto something scandalous. Not stressing my mind on Noah more than I was commanded by him, I held the door open for Otis and followed him inside. I didn't know there were places so fancy in this city. It's nothing special. Let's pick a spot. There were no bad or awkward seats in the restaurant. At one point or another, Noah and I had sat at all of them. With Otis across from me, I took a seat at one of the booths, divided along a wall, lit by a dim lamp suspended low above the table. It wasn't long before a waitress approached us and spoke. "Can I get you started with something to drink?" "Hot tea, please." "And for you?" Otis hesitated to answer as she looked at him. "I'll have the same." The waitress left to fetch our drink. "I have never tried that before, but if you like it, I'll give it a shot, as long as it's better than what your sister tried to make me drink." The waitress then came back with 2 mugs and 2 tea bags, besides a metal teapot on a glass saucer, then left again to allow us to decide what else to order. I prepared my cup of tea and sipped at it, and Otis was quick to follow, watching and copying my moves to ensure he did it right. "Wow, this is nice. It's not too strong and not too sweet, bitter but simple, like it should be." With that, I liked Otis all the more. So, someone else understands. Bitter things that have kept me comfortable. Although I suppose it's all a personal ordeal. Acquired taste, like Carol's coffee. My sis drinks coffee a bunch too, but I don't know how she tolerates it. The kind Carol made wasn't even half as strong as the kind my sis had the one time I tried it. "You have a sister." As I became more comfortable with Otis, more mysteries surrounding him arose. Could there have been more of his kind? Whatever he was? Uh-huh. I haven't seen her since. I was taken by the moth. Something didn't add up. Did the moth imprison her too? I hope not. I was with her some days ago, but I don't guess I saw them trying to seize her before they dragged me off. In the middle of his story, the waitress approached us again. "Do you need a minute to know what you want?" "I think I'll have this." I pointed to an item of my choosing on the menu before me. "How would you like it cooked?" "Well done." "How about you?" "I'll have the same thing as him." Otis didn't bother to look at the menu or ask what I ordered. He was so comfortable in my taste that he copied my choice, certain that it would please him too. "I'll put your orders in and it'll be ready shortly." With that, waitress started off. "I'm sure the food will be better than whatever they give you in prison." "If you say so, I'll believe it." This is hardly the most expensive place in town, but the food here is a real luxury, let me tell you. The simplest things seem luxurious after you've been through what I have. There was a time not too long ago when I wouldn't have even been able to afford a meal like this. Then I got in with the moth, worked hard, and the income eventually came in. The moth made things better for you? I saw the doubt in his eyes as he reflected on recent events. I wonder how many people think I sit on a pedestal because of my job. That's not the case. I'm no different from anyone. I've seen begging in the streets or anyone else walking past those beggars. I don't know what happened to the moth. I thought they were good. I thought it was doing something right. I'm sorry for whatever they did to you. In my time in jail, they were cold to me. I refused to give in to the demands. My alarm bells were sounding off. As for Noah's orders, I calmed my suspicion for the time being. But before that, things weren't so bad with my sis. It didn't feel like we lived in luxury, but she at least made sure I never went hungry. That was already noticeable. He was far from as scrawny as I was. In a sense, knowing he was well off than me, I envied his leisure. My earlier hunch was disproven. And now I'm glad you took me here. If I'm here with you, things can't be all bad. You don't have to apologize to me. A scandalous situation indeed. Though I do wonder where my sister is now. His eyes lit up and his disheartenment wasn't eliminated as he spotted our waitress carrying plates around the corner and arriving to set them in front of us. 2 steaks, well done. Could you cut into them to make sure they're cooked to your liking? I took the fork and knife lying beside the plate and cut into it. The exterior was brown and charred without a trace of pink on the interior. Otis followed suit, staring at the steak before him, eyebrows raised with perplexity. Even so, he chose what I chose without question and said nothing. It's fine, thank you. Enjoy your meal. So the waitress left us alone once more. If you don't like it, I can get you something else. It's not a problem. Otis stuffed the fork to his mouth and took a bite of the steak. He strained to chew it. Not everyone likes it well done. I've even been scolded for my taste. It may be a little overcooked for me. The flavor's good enough, I can stand it. If he claimed to not have lived in total luxury, I wonder how many of his meals in the past may have been undercooked. Maybe bad cooking is what mutated him. He had too much raw land and suffered side effects. Probably not, but I have no leads on where he got those horns and ears. Tossing conversation aside, I put my focus on eating. The walk here left me especially hungry, but this moment relieved me. The more I ate, my mind wandered off, and the deeper the silence became. Eventually, I found myself staring at Otis again as he looked back at me while trying his hardest to chew. He wore an expression of uncertainty, to which I was left uncertain if that was due to me or his food. I finished my meal as he continued to work on his. Would you want something else? You don't have to do that for me. I'll be fine. Before continuing to sip of my tea, I blurted out a simple question. Do you trust me? It was his persistence to copy my orders that made me ponder that. It was foreign to me to have a stranger look up to me like this, given how the rest of the mob must have treated him. I still wasn't convinced that I was any different from the rest of them in his eyes. There's something else, Account. I can see there's something in you that's a little different from the other mob. Something tells me you had a reason to let me go. That had nothing to do with any of them. Carol suggested that, and I simply couldn't let her down. Remember, when I said I had your back, if you had mine, I'll tell you what. He leaned in closer to me, gazing with a stern expression into my eyes. What do you desire? I was asked that question enough at the moth initiation, and I couldn't avoid it. Even now, even the men I freed from their clutches brought back their shallow, motivational speeches to haunt me in his smoke. This was a strange question to bring up without prior context, but I gave it some thought nonetheless. At least now I could answer without feeling pressured to give a correct response. I feel like he misses his dad. Even so, I couldn't form a concrete idea. There were a variety of things I believed my life still lacked, though the number was too great for me to list them all. I don't know if I can tell you now, but there are a few things I've wanted for a while that might be nice if they're possible. Well, if there's anything you want, you might be in luck. Since you've been so kind to me, I want to return the favor. This said, I can't tell this to anyone, but I want to help you. I want to grant a wish of yours. What? I bet you've been wondering what's up with me. Why I look the way I do. Why I was in jail. No need to hide it from me. The truth is, I can grant people's wishes. This isn't something I'll do for just anyone. The rest of the mob sure tried to get something out of me, but like I said, I didn't like any of them. Nice. I wasn't sure whether to humor or believe his wild claim, given how ridiculous the circumstances leading up to now were. My reaction was both baffled and indifferent. Furthermore, that explained nothing about his hair, eyes, ears, and horns. Had I been too forgiving of him to notice his eccentricity? If I wasn't crazy, everyone in the city was. A wish, huh? I had no stronger impression to give him. Anything you want, I'm sure you wish for nice things. He gave me the bright smile I came to expect of him. In a sense, I was flattered. This was a strange offer, but whatever it signified, it meant he began to put his faith in me. I'll think about it. Are you finished eating? I say we best get out of here and continue our scouting. My time here relaxed me as it always did, even without Noah present. Concern for him and whatever the rest of my mission entailed still lingered over me. Otis and I stood up from the booth, and I had my eyes set on the front counter to pay. Then I heard a yell echo from the entrance. There, here. I turned my eyes to the entrance and saw two soldiers. Count Canavos. As soon as I became comfortable, dread set in. I didn't know what happened, but I knew something happened nonetheless. Something went wrong. They ran up to me and Otis. You're the scout, right? Where have you been? Better him here than wandering even further off. We have our sights on the perpetrator of another attack. The thought of having to act again left me feverish. Assuming Noah was already informed of the incident, he must have felt just as anxious, knowing I would be dragged into trouble in spite of his wish for me to feel at peace. I had a duty to live on through my concern and show to him I was capable of survival. With Otis behind me, I followed the small squadron jogging through the city streets, though they frequently stopped to survey their surroundings with caution, trembling all the while. We shouldn't confront him head on. You two especially. We can't afford something to happen to you. This guy is dangerous. It was strange that after my act of treason, anyone other than Noah cared at all for my safety. Noah mentioned Otis was treated like a government property, so it was safe to assume the mob summoning us pertained to that fact. Did they know about the story Otis had told me about himself? Can't tell me they believed that and thought this would accomplish anything. Our group came across another. You have the scout. The perpetrators are around here. We caught up to their trail after they left their belongings in a restaurant. Navos, we should have enough men and equipment to seize that rebel this time. However, in the event that he can't be contained, and he should, it's a good thing we have you and him. The soldier leaned to another to mutter. Does he have a name? Otis. Yes, Otis, the mob appreciates your compliance now. It's not for you. I cut off his speech to stir enthusiasm for their cause. That's right. I'll be able to put him to use for the good of society. I then directed a whisper back at him. That's dangerous. You're not free just yet. Stay subtle. I thought back on Noah's advice. Don't listen to the words of anyone. Make a decision that's your own. I kept this in mind to defy the mob if they ever did something suspicious again. The mob seemed to get shadier the more I associated with them, but I couldn't afford to throw away the life I attained just yet. Following the squadron, Otis and I found our way to a throng of other soldiers packed in the street, all with their backs to us. This is it, Canavos. We have the criminals surrounded. Pay attention, but maintain a safe distance from the harm's way. I heard a voice coming from another end of the crowd. You won't get away this time, not with our elite soldier about to slice you in half. Elite? Soldier? Noah was in a higher rank than me. He was of the elite class. Was this him? He wasn't taking this savage on himself, was he? From my position, I couldn't see the foremost soldier. More of my focus was on my determination to escape with Otis. You and your little friend have caused more than enough trouble around these parts already, and we had enough of you. Are you sure you don't want to just let us take you peaceful? The soldier's voice was cut short as I heard a thud. A sequence of louder thuds followed, ending with a sound of sorts I didn't recall hearing anywhere before. A silence filled the air as the crowd before me stood motionless. A ferocious scream then echoed throughout the street. The crowd shifted around with many soldiers moving forward and away from me. I grabbed Otis's wrist and dashed away before chaos ensued. Screams were heard throughout the street as I ran into a nearby alley. Glancing back, I caught a glimpse of soldiers assuming battle stance. I stood hidden in the shade, involuntarily grasping Otis's hand tighter and looking into his eyes seemingly glowing from within the darkness. While I was afraid of witnessing too much of the scene, he didn't tremble in the slightest as he gazed at the opening between buildings. We should be safe from the main crowd. You don't have to shake like that. Briefly between the waves of soldiers I identified by their red coats, I spotted two figures wearing unaffiliated clothing. One was a small, dainty girl with short, dark hair. Close to her was a tall, white man with unkempt brown hair. In his hand was a sword, half as wide and almost half as tall as he was, that he swung to and fro. I recognized this blade to be an elite mob-style broadsword. It was typical of only high-ranking officers to have the permission, let alone the strength and skill to wield such a weapon. Surrounding the black interior of its surface, the gleaming golden edges of the blade's simple design were made intricate by what looked like two symmetrical pairs of hooks forming a ring around the tip. That gleam was dulled by stains of red. It was evident that his sword wasn't his own. Aside from the sword, something of greater intrigue caught my eye. A green scarf, a cream-colored dress shirt, and a pair of black pants tucked neatly into a pair of brown boots. Despite the lack of any indication of his occupation or societal status, I had seen his exact outfit enough times beforehand to recognize it in its entirety. This was a distinct uniform of my father. I had forgotten how iconic this obscure, insignificant combination of clothing was, until I was reminded of it now. I rejected the idea of this being a coincidence. As the sword-wielding man walked onward with the girl behind him, both leaving my sight, my chance to examine him any more was gone. However, I was thankful he didn't chase me down this alley. Sweat drenched my hand as I clenched Otis' hand the tightest I could. He looked onward and never resisted my grip. Realizing what I was doing, I yanked my hand away and wiped both against my pants. The sounds of shouting, metal clashing, flesh tearing, and even the faint echo of footsteps all died down. Sounds like no one's around anymore. Based on his inhuman ears, I assumed he had better hearing than me, so his claim eased me. We survived, but I was certain that we were a miraculous exception. Desperate curiosity pulled me forward. I sprinted away from Otis and into open, sunlit street, where the scene had unfolded. Soldiers, or dismembered body parts of soldiers, lined the street covered in spatters and trails of vibrant red. The heavy silence was only broken by a faint moan which I couldn't bear to seek out the source of right away. Under the impression such a survivor may have had no chance left, but I realized there was something I still had to confirm. At the end of the trail of corpses and blood lay shimmering silver from the armor of who had to be the elite soldiers sent to the front. I sprinted forward to investigate, perhaps against my better judgment. The closer I came to that armor-plated soldier, the more of the faint features I recognized, aside from the splotch of blood across his lower chin, neck, and shoulders. No. He was approximately the same size. No. Strands of blonde hair trickled to the ground from the backside of the helmet, loosely fastened on his head. No. I knew this man. Noah laid before. I collapsed to my knees, hanging my head and pressing my hands against the ground. I let out a lengthy shout from the top of my lungs that echoed across the streets until my voice trailed off into a breathless, unstable whimper. Tears filled my eyes and ran down my cheeks as I slammed a fist in repetition against the bricks below me. I heard footsteps approach me, knowing they were Otis's. How embarrassing to see me lose my temper too much. Then more footsteps came and I turned to my side in panic. Anavos. It was only two mouse soldiers. Oh, is that Noah Tolstoy? You can't tell me that madman actually killed him. He was one of our best. One of the soldiers sat outside and glanced around. What's done is done. We have to do something before things get any worse. It's good we at least have a scout around. I stuttered as I stood up and spoke, still teary-eyed. What do I need to do? It shouldn't have come to this, but now that things are in place, you had to perform an alteration to science. We were informed you would be capable at least. We would think Tolstoy assigned you for a reason. What are you talking about? If you don't get the specifics, I'll tell you in all over a meeting or something. We've got to go. You got a lot more to tell me. What the hell do I do? Wish for something helpful. Maybe just make sure more people don't die for now. Stop the killer, whatever you please. You've got to be kidding me. People were dying and the mob kept up this game of pretend? The soldiers ran down the street, leaving me and Otis alone. So you want me to help? I guess things worked out after that mediocre brunch. Otis, what's going... As I turned around to Otis, I couldn't comprehend what my eyes were seeing. He was on his hands and knees, leaning with an open mouth on Noah's neck. What are you doing? Out of instinct, I shielded my eyes and let out a holler. I'm doing what I must to grant you a wish. I heard a slurping noise. It wasn't the mere sound of swallowing one's saliva. Foreign material had to be entering his mouth. I had no idea what the ceremony for making a wish come true would entail, but the possibility I was imagining seemed far too fantastical and far too crude. But was it any more fantastical and crude than that which I already experienced in the past few days? I removed my hands from my face so as to deny reality. Nothing changed other than that. Otis's hands were not the same smooth, tender human hands which I held earlier. One more inhuman feature had appeared on his body, though it was also far from anything reminiscent of a sheep. His hands were covered in a pink fur like that of his hair, and in place of stubby fingers were long, sharp black claws. They resembled that of a beast I had never seen before. I didn't look at his face for fear of it losing its innocent charm. There was no more of this reality to deny. I could only guide my eyes away from that which I didn't want to know. Here I stood, witnessing the scene in front of my own eyes. Otis, on his knees, leaning over Noah's body, scraping at the skin with his claws, licking at each pool of blood that flowed forth, tearing apart the flesh where deep gashes already were, reaching his digits deeper into the body. My eyes were partially shielded by what of Noah's clothing remained attached to his body, though Otis did what he could to undress him. The sight of his corpse were ingrained into my mind, but I couldn't look away. I realized Noah could not come back, yet I felt concern for what remained of him. Otis stopped. I couldn't look him in the eyes, but he turned his head to look up at me. What's wrong? Only soft whimpers escaped me as tears fell from my eyes again. I'm beginning to see. I haven't done this with someone so squeamish. I guess you can look away, but I want you to think about what you want. He let out a giggle before the sounds of ripping flesh and inhuman chewing resumed. I couldn't take it anymore. I ran for the nearest alley, sat down and slumped over wide-eyed. I wanted to cover my ears and guard them from the noise of the Otis's eating that leaked over to me, until I heard another sound that caught my attention. It was the same frail moaning from earlier. I looked over and saw a soldier twitching. All of his limbs were intact, though he was covered in blood. He was one of the few who survived this mess. Noah may have been gone, but this one at least still clung to life despite how grave his injuries were. No, wait. Was Noah truly gone? Perhaps I panicked too soon. Otis said he could grant me a wish right now. I wished for nothing more than everyone's well-being. Noah told me to prepare for the worst, if not hope for the best. I strained my mind on assessing the situation in order to make the best judgment. The pieces of the puzzle began to come together. Carol was abducted. Otis refused to comply with the moth. I freed Otis and won his favor. Violence broke out in the streets. Noah sent me to scout with Otis. Otis offered to grant me a wish. The final ingredient was human flesh. Witchcraft was real, and Otis was its unholy master. I shuddered at the thought of him devouring my sister's corpse. Then I let out a muffled squeal as I remembered he was already devouring the corpse of my dearest friend. Now was not the time for falling into fear. Accepting reality, I acknowledged that I had a chance to turn everything around. I lost track of time as I did everything in my power to stay calm. Though my breathing was heavier than it should have been, I was only waiting for Otis to come to me, too frightened to face him myself. From this distance I heard sounds I didn't know people were capable of making, of course. Otis was barely human, but if I were to look at him, I feared even less of him would be recognizable. Account. His voice came from directly beside me. I stood up and looked at him. His clothes, innocent thawed, were tarnished by red stains. Did I keep you waiting? I'm sorry. He gave off a soft, gentle tone, though it unsettled me more than it comforted me. It's been a while since I had a meal as good as that. It'd be a waste not to take my time. But now it'd be a waste not to make things up to you. I can see it more clearly now. You do want something, don't you? Let me make your wish come true. I took a step out of the alley, looking around. Now was the time to go mad and embrace the reality I became part of. If Noah left me with the truth, now was the time to make him proud. As I glanced over at Noah's corpse, even more tattered than I remember, the surviving soldier croaked once more. I prepared to tell Otis what my choice would be. I can make a really good choice here, or I can make a really bad choice here. Ah, God. I could revive Noah, who is probably beyond dead and probably won't come back like I wish he would be back. Or I can heal some unknown soldier that I don't know and don't care about because they probably were shitty. Anyways, but Noah also just Noah does Noah does not tell us things. But they he also said don't listen. Uh, can I revive the person he even ate? Like, is that a thing I can do? This had to be undone. I had to get Noah back. Please. I faced Otis, ready to explain my desire to him, but oh. Otis gave off a pained expression, contorting into shock. He leaned over and gagged, wrapping his arms around himself and clenching his sides with both hands. Blood dripped from his gaping mouth before pouring forth. Clean, bright red liquid fell to the ground, mixed with muddy, diluted shade of red, while he choked and fell to his knees. It all trickled from his nose, and damper chunks barely recognizable as flesh were vomited to the ground, if not further, soiling his shirt once white. I could only stand back and fix my eyes on him in horror. After a moment's stillness, waiting for anything more than happened, to let out breathless groans before speaking hoarsely. How unlikely. How unlikely that you would think that. He let out what sounded like panting more than laughing. That aside, you wanted that man back that badly. Hold on, I didn't tell him anything, but he already knew what I wanted? I'm sorry that your wish had to be wasted like this. Oh. My wish? He stood and gave me a sickly expression. It couldn't be done. His own body couldn't be used in the process to restore himself. Yeah, that's what I figured. In one more event of this bizarre reality, Noah was simply no more. Much like everything else I witnessed, I didn't want to believe that I had to accept. My tears dried through my eyes, still stung. The air became silent. I realized I could no longer hear the one other soldier hanging on his last breath. Otis stared at me and stared back into his eyes, the color red covering his face. I couldn't waste more time crying, as another pressing matter came to mind. Carol. You have to find Carol. Otis continued to stare at me, now with his face as stainless and pristine as I remembered it to be. Before the tragedy, his clothing was clean and spotless. The color red only appeared where it belonged. Every corpse once lining the ground was nowhere to be found. Every trail and puddle of blood was missing. The pattern of the concrete stone was different. I hadn't moved an inch, but I wasn't standing in the same street that I stood in a second ago. Right before me lay the fortune teller. Right beside the fortune teller lay everything that I remembered to surround it. As I accepted reality, it seemed to trick me once more. You weren't here, Otis. This is where you wanted to be. That's right. The first place I wanted to check for Carol's whereabouts was the fortune teller. Then you granted my wish. Of course. Sorry the first one didn't work. I swallowed my sorrow, barged through the door of the coffee shop, and shouted, Carol? Account? A reply was immediate. My panic faded as I saw her before my eyes. I'm glad you showed up. The guard Noah assigned to me ditched me as soon as some others came by and said something was up. But you had something you needed to do, didn't you? Is everything alright? She didn't know, and I couldn't tell her. I muttered and stuttered. I heard about the attacks happening and had to know if you were fine. Yeah, I'm fine now. Don't you worry about me. Except earlier, some guy walked in and outright stole some food I just made before running out. He didn't do anything else, but it startled me. Carol often claimed that one day she would have an exciting story to tell me about her ventures in working at a coffee shop to make up for my uninteresting workdays, but this was unexpectedly peculiar. I gave her a question in hopes that she would tell a humorous tale to distract me. What did the guy look like? He was pretty big and had messy brown hair, and a girl about my age was following him too. I let out a gasp without thinking. Huh? I couldn't bear the thought of my sister being in the same room as the madman. I could have lost her along with Noah. We have to stop him. I couldn't utter more than a breathless mumble. Maybe you or Noah can do something about him soon? I swear all the other members of the mob are useless. What's that look? Don't tell me you're so worried about me after what happened the other day. Well, I'm happy you haven't stopped looking out for me. He looked real concerned on the way here. I felt the weight of Otis' hands upon my shoulders from behind. Noah was the only one to ever put his hands on my shoulders before. I worried Otis was taking a liking to me too quickly, but at the same time I appreciated this. Against my trembling, the warmth of his thick hands were enough to calm me again. I became able to reassure myself that even if something could have happened to Carol, nothing did, and she was alive before my eyes. Otis removed his hands from me as Carol resumed speaking. Why don't you two stay here for a while? Have you had lunch yet? I felt too sick to eat anything. We ate not too long ago, but tea would help me. I'm still pretty hungry. I would have thought he was left too sick to try and eat anymore, as the image of him puking on my best friend's entrails came to mind again. I shuddered again at the thought of his diet's consistency. Account, it isn't that cold in here, is it? I'll get some hot drinks for you too, and Carol peered past me as I heard the door open. Turning around, I saw a small squadron of moss soldiers walk in. The Navos, is it? You're awfully far away from the scene of the crime, and on foot, no less. Have you been slacking off? There was a theft here. So, not just that, but your priorities are wrong too. We were just there. Oh, you were, huh? That's right. Account all to science. The soldiers gave off surprised and pleased introductions and mumbled along themselves. So Tolstoy wasn't kidding, huh? Altered science? They're not gonna like what I wish for. What did you wish for, Canavos? Wish? There were no survivors at the scene of the crime, so I wished to make sure if my sister was okay. Now I'm here. The squadron gave me condescending looks. Shame you did so, little, but I suppose under pressure it's good your intent was in the right place. Now it would be nice if you did something like getting the device back or some other odd jobs the boss might want done. If we could take care of all those pesky rebels, then maybe we'll be able to go home and stay home. In the meantime, I have another job in mind for you. Who do you think you are? The soldier speaking let out a sigh and looked at all around himself. Where did that rump go? The door behind the group opened. Akai, you're lagging behind. The squadron parted two sides, forming path for the girl who just entered. She was much shorter than the other soldiers, but clad in the same uniform. Her eyes were heavy, lacking any sort of vigor. But upon facing my general direction, her gaze went straight to Carol, as the two stared wide-eyed at each other. Not you again. What's wrong? It was her. She was the one of the cops who took me away. The girl wore a heartbroken expression as Carol looked at her with scorn. I was doing what I was told. My superior. She could have formed a complete idea. Oh yes, just where is he? He's gone. Gone? Killed by that man. The girl hung her head lower as Carol remained unfazed. A silence crept up to the commotion, before being broken by the man who only seemed to care about business. Like I was saying, Canavos, there's a job you're suited for, and I have no doubt it would be in the interests of Louise here, too. Of course, we've got to put a stop to that berserker man. We don't know where he'll strike next, but we have reasonable leads on his base of operation. For more than only his doing, we've pinpointed a general area where crime has been thriving. We've developed high suspicions that this is all the work of an organized force bent on opposing the moth. In a sense, it was like Noah sacrificed himself for my safety. Whoever these rebels were, I saw I had every reason to fear them. Even so, I had every reason to oppose them in turn, if it meant no more harm could come to those I cared about. But therein lay the problem. Carol. Take me with you. What? Ma'am, it wouldn't be wise if you embark on such a risky journey. You're safest here. Like hell, with you numbskulls in charge, account if you can look after Otis, you're going to have to look out for me too. I'm not sticking around here. Unless Noah comes back, that is. His hands are tied up at the moment. Then it's settled. I want to know more about this organization. As stern and determined as could be, her expression leaked not an ounce of lightheartedness. As concerned as I was, I sympathized with her circumstances. Above all, I was relieved at how unquestioning she was of Noah's whereabouts. Fine, I'll watch over you. You better stay close to me. Looks like we'll coop up together yet again. At least we're outside this time. Well, Louise, you should be ready too. I have no choice, but I'm more than ready. Withholding any disheartenment, she looked up at the officer in the eye. Though I couldn't forgive her for mistreating my sister, I saw a bit of myself in the timid young soldier, and only wish she could have had a chance to be more fortunate than I was. If you can accomplish something then hopefully this will give you a taste of independence. Let's lead off already. Although only I, Otis, Carol, Louise, and a few other members of the mob walked together, I felt cramped in their company. The empty streets became less lively as we progressed. I was only a sheep following the herd with nowhere else to go. Had it been only Otis and Carol, my attention would have been eased, although they would have struggled to compete with my melancholy. I added to the silence pervading the trip. Having nothing to contribute and knowing that nothing anyone said could console me, the input Carol put out in the open was understandable, but her attitude worried me. Account, do you think it's a good idea to keep taking their orders? I'm just trying to figure it out. You saw the death of countless other soldiers at the scene of the crime, didn't you, Mr. Canavos? It's a horrid sight. Louise may have wanted to use me to win Carol over. Mumbling aloud, Carol didn't bat an eye at Louise's statement. It's hard to see you pretend to care about this city. I want to do what's best. We're going to make sure no more people are murdered. Carol stopped in the street and gave her a death stare. You don't care about anyone except the members of your elite. Then someone fights back and you all wonder why. Louise then stopped and turned to Carol, not showing as much hostility but still expressing contempt. Is that how you see it? What that murderer did isn't right. Maybe I made a mistake, and I'm sorry, but those soldiers didn't deserve to die. You honestly think that kind of retribution is justified? Not on my watch. Hey, let's get a move on. We have things to do. The girls paid no heed to the others as they bickered on. If you find the rebel organization, here's what your plan. I'll contain them. I swear, I won't let any one of the likes of that madman keep running free. Is that what they made you think about me? No, it was an honest mistake. Can't you forgive someone when they're trying to make up for something that goes wrong? Huh. Maybe this rampant savage you want to take down so badly made a few mistakes too. Maybe it's a little over the top, but it's not without reason. As the silence crept up to the street again, running footsteps echoed nearby. Who's there? Everyone stood still and looked all around as more footsteps layered upon each other. Otis took my hand and yanked me to the side as we stepped away from the group. I heard a yelp cut short from one of the soldiers. Turning back to the crowd, I saw the soldiers caught in the grip of a young woman with long dark hair covering her eyes, raising a mouth-style sword to his neck. Don't move. Who them off demands you take your hands away from the officer at once. A assortment of other people crept up around the soldier, some also holding blades, a few of which were the same model as the girls. Given that the sale and ownership of anything that could be classified as a sword was prohibited among civilians, stolen weapons seemed to be in style. I demand you step away from the girl and the boy slowly. More than anyone else, I realized she was talking to me as I stood right beside Otis and Carol. My uniform left me indistinguishable from the others in the force. Carol and Louise ended up creating a scene and drawing attention to us. Another civilian in tattered clothing approached the threatening girl and pulled out a rope, preparing to tie the captive soldier's hands behind his back. Louise took slow, steady steps to the side away from Carol, keeping her eyes fixed on the long-haired girl. Louise jolted upon feeling her arms forcibly taken a hold of as she too was being tied up. Who do you think you are? Pest control. You do your job, I do mine. We don't want any trouble. I pulled my hands away from Otis and stepped away from him. I didn't want to risk anyone else being harmed. Count? With the girl now holding only her sword, she wasted no time approaching me. I was the last of the soldiers left untied. Otis jumped between us and faced her with his arms spread. What are you doing? You can't take him. This guy didn't do anything wrong. In a moment, light footsteps came from a nearby alley. Just when we have a secure base of operations, they find us now. Out of the shadows emerged a woman standing tall atop the hills, wearing a plain black coat over a white dress. Surveying the scene before her, her eyes lit up upon looking in my general direction. You're alive? Her voice expressed faint emotion, but was as cool as could be. Ah! Otis turned to her, still with his arms outstretched. She rushed forward and was caught in Otis's embrace, leaning over to wrap her arms around him in turn. She escaped his grasp and took a step back, placing both hands on each of his shoulders as everyone watched the scene in silence. I didn't think you'd be able to escape. I didn't think I'll see you here. What happened? Are you hurt? Her tone grew more unstable and more she spoke. Otis lifted his hands and took a hold of her wrist. I'm fine, sis. I didn't get out of the moth clutches alone. He's the one who helped me. He tilted his head to look back at me, and the woman peered over his shoulder, scrunching her face as she made eye contact with me. I can't, Carol. This is my sister, Melanie. I'm glad you all could finally meet. I expected something entirely different from her. With blonde hair, blue eyes, and no unusual inhuman traits, someone as ordinary as her wouldn't have struck me as Otis's relative. Another member of the moth, really now. She was entirely disinterested in Otis's attempt at making our encounter into formal greeting. From either members of my own cause or from everyone else's, I couldn't escape judgment. You trust him more than the others. I've seen his thoughts. I know he has good intentions. Melanie let out a gasp. She was aware of everything implied. Seen his thoughts? You don't mean you actually... I'm sorry, I may have gotten carried away, but I just wanted to return the favor for him. Him having seen my thoughts would make sense for granting my wish, though I hoped he didn't witness everything else my mind had to offer. If he continued to defend me, however, then he could be trusted with trusting me. Perhaps it's too much to trust someone with... even so. So, this kid is the... Melanie released her grip from Otis and stood upright, eyeing me as she then marched up to me. Hand over your sword. I glanced down my sword, secured by the sheath hanging at my waist, and back to Melanie, then took my time removing it, reaching it out to her with both hands as slowly as I could manage. Before I could extend my arms further, she swiped the sheathed sword away with one hand and tucked it under her arm. Joanna, get the other soldiers where they belong. This one and the girl will come with me and Otis. Whatever you say, watch yourself. The long-haired girl pranced aside and began handling Louise, while the surrounding civilians dragged the other members of the squadron into an alley, leaving only Carol and I to face Otis and Melanie. Perhaps I was wrong about you. You too, follow me. Melanie took Otis's hand and led me and Carol through a series of thin alleyways, hidden in shadow. Eventually reaching a door, she opened it, stepping aside to allow everyone else in. Once more, I was dragged into business I wanted no involvement in. We all made our way inside an unflattering warehouse illuminated only by a few candles and whatever sunlight leaked in through the windows, located high on the dilapidated brick walls, which were plastered in wooden framework. Thus, floating and glimmering in the light showcased the condition of the interior, though an assortment of color, quilts, pillows, and quaint decor adorning the scattered furniture gave off an welcoming contrast. Otis went right away to sit on the couch, surrounding a coffee table alongside a few chairs at the center of the boardroom. Have a seat. Melanie walked over to sit beside Otis, grabbing a coffee cup that was on the table. Leaning back and crossing her legs, she showed a more relaxed side of herself, though she was far from warm to her guests. Carol sat in the metal chair opposite of me, as we took one of the few opportunities for rest we had gotten throughout the day. However, while I leaned forward with my elbows on my knees, she sat straight up. We were unable to make ourselves at home. Melanie took a long sip from her cup as Carol spoke up. So, you're Otis' sister, and you're in on the resistance? You could call me that. I was awfully young to be a mother when he came into my life. A resistance, huh? You're still involved with these gangs? Rest easy, it's different now. I work for the people of Enonia, unlike the likes of your friend here. However, if you trusted him with a wish and continue to trust him, I'll listen to him. Wish? Again with the wishes? What's all this mean? It's alright if we tell. Fine, put simply, Otis has the power to grant the wishes of people he trusts. Carol's face looked distraught with confusion. In the moment, a voice called out. This is your magical friend? The long-haired girl and a few of the other civilians from earlier entered the room and stood around the table, eyeing Otis and mumbling among themselves. This is him. If you still don't believe me, just look and tell me if you've seen anything like that. She reached for the ribbon resting on Otis's head to lift it away. Some gasping and murmurs resounded across the room. Those are horns on a person? John marched up and leaned in, taking a closer look at Otis as he reeled back. I never have thought you'd be telling the truth all this time. She stood up, took a step back, and put a hand to her chin in thought. He's something else, that's for sure. But the wish granting, the alteration of science, as you call it? In time, Joanna. Well, that's something I like to see too. I mean, given everything else about him, that doesn't sound outside the realm of possibility anymore. Before I have anything to prove, I want him to take it easy. I have no doubt the poor child has had it rough recently. Although alteration of science was the last thing I wanted to see, and the last thing I wanted Carol to be exposed to, Melanie's patience was reassuring. It hasn't been all bad thanks to Account and Carol. You perplex me, Account, but I have little reason to doubt what Otis says, if it's true. And what association do you have with this boy, Carol? I was told it looked as if you were being harassed by the mob in the street. Her cold disposition was unwavering, but I could detect her earnest affection for Otis. If anything, it may not have been unlike my relationship with Carol, though less teasing. I'm his sister. He let Otis free because I insisted after Account came to save me from the mob's imprisonment. I think we both have less of a reason to trust the mob after this. And Member's own family arrested? That's a side of them even I haven't seen. So you two have also been betrayed, like everyone else. I welcome you to the Warriors Against State Persecution. Molly, you're just gonna let this redcoat guy in? While Carol seems fine to me, we'll see about Account. However, like I said, Otis doesn't grant wishes for just anyone. He has to have read Account's mind. You see nothing wrong with him, Otis? He's a really good person. Thanks for the self-esteem boost, at least. He hasn't said anything. You have been awfully quiet, Account. Is something wrong? The earlier incident was a shock that I didn't have the heart to contribute anything in spite of many surprises that were thrown my way and begged me to speak up. Each event only brought forth more questions, each question I expected no answer from, and each answer I did receive only brought forth more confusion. He's had a long day. Whatever we're doing, I know he'll be able to help us out a bunch. I wasn't certain I was being drafted into the most noble cause, which made me question again the sympathy I harbored for Otis not long ago. What's your aim? We toppled them off. Everyone gets their life back. It's simple. Only gauge on an emotionless glare. Not so simple to wish away the entire force. You think I haven't tried before? Perhaps there were other things on my mind, distracting me from doing it right, but there must be a better way. Maybe if I knew where their leader is now. In any event, as I said, we're a force that works for the benefit of the people. The agenda of the moth is not in the interests of the people. We saw Carol from afar and assumed the soldiers weren't doing anything with her well-being in mind, so our members went out to see to her. That's about right. I would have hated to be with them any longer than I had to be. I wanted to inform Carol that seeing what happened to Noah, this group, may not have been the best approach in mind. But the thought of such an explanation still exhausted me, and I wasn't sure if any of their other members would care. Then account what brought the group of soldiers you were together with in this part of the city, and with Carol for that matter. I went with him because I didn't feel safe alone. Then I wanted to see for myself about the rebel organization the police said they would be on the lookout for. They felt the need to bring Otis too. Curious. Don't you have an idea of what the moth wants to count? She was able to infer my exact involvement in the moth's grand scheme. Were I in her position, I doubted I would have been able to make an observation so astute. He doesn't know. The moth has kept him in the dark. Otis was the one to save me from speaking up this time, though to my fright as much as my relief, those statements were true, and they were things I never mentioned to anyone. But if I never had to speak, maybe people should have read my mind more often, so long as they didn't dig too deep. With the recent tragedy in mind, it was amazing that Otis continued to defend me. That was a frightening sight that he may have, in fact, gazed too deeply into my conflicted soul. That may have made him all the better a tool, were it not for the fact that Carol was abducted. Lest that be employed too. But such an obvious betrayal wouldn't put any wishes in their favor after the fact. That's right, there was no need to panic, given the severity of a threat which they perceived me as after I had freed Otis and Carol. The moth must not have thought it through. Oh, that still raised the question as to what their alleged countermeasure to my treason was supposed to be, which also failed. Whatever they called the device was stolen now too. Perhaps Melanie had the all of the answers, but I remained too fatigued to bother straining my mind on my unfortunate circumstances any longer than I was forced to. Taking her coffee cup away from her face, she looked to me, then to Carol. I can't gather that you two must have had it hard recently too. Her tone warmed up, but she was hardly inviting to me yet. More than getting welcomed into such a strange neighborhood, and more than getting any answers, I wanted to go home. I stood and spoke up. If there's something you need to know, I'll check in with them off and learn what they're up to. Betrayed by the police, yet going back to them so soon. How can we know for sure you're not a spy? We don't even know if this pink-haired guy is telling the truth only. Sure, he looks funny, but we haven't even seen this magic yet. If Account and Otis want in, they ought to show us their worth sometime. What a tightly woven family. Well, you're not wrong. We wouldn't want information about the location of the base to be revealed, would we? Account, Carol, I hope you won't mind staying the night here. As long as you keep the cops tied up and far away from me, I think I'll be fine here. Account, I'll just go back with my sis, so now I hate for you to be the one to leave so quickly. Otis gave me a bitter smile. Fine. I sat down on the edge of my seat. To the important matters, aren't we running low on supplies? What's everyone going to do for dinner tonight? We can figure out restocking tomorrow. We should have enough for now, even with our guests. Really? I hope so, because I'm starving. I still felt too sick to bother eating, so I would skip yet another meal. It's the duty of the WASP to be accommodating to the people when the state isn't. John, be a dear and show Carol to a spare bed. I'll be in the kitchen shortly. Aye. Otis, you can look around with them too. I'd like to get to know Account more if that's not a problem. Oh, of course! Carol put on a smile as she stood and followed Joanne. Otis then stood and followed suit, taking a glance back at me and Melanie before exiting the room with the other two. The small crowd of other rebel citizens dispersed from the room as Melanie and I were the last two present and seated. Who was the unlucky one? No time wasted. My colleague was killed by a man who took his sword and lashed out at him. Pitiful. I wondered how a soul as warm as Otis claimed relations to someone so cold. Whoever that man is, he killed countless other moth soldiers today. And the day before, was this your doing? Nonsense! Such a savage has no affiliation with us. I got an immediate response. That man was entirely unrelated to this rebel group, basically tied to the site of lesser criminal activities. There would be no reason to enact a revolt so careless, but you were led here by him? I don't know where he is, but I heard a lot of criminal activity is happening around here. That's why the squadron came. Perhaps the Wasp should work more discreetly from now on then. Even so, I thank you. Huh, you thank me? It's this situation that allowed you to bring Otis back. I worried about the child as much work as I did for the Wasp. I doubted it would be enough to find him again. Tell me, you never gave in to the demands of the Moth, did you? I tried to save someone. That's what I wished for. She sighed. I'm relieved it would sicken me if he became a tool of the police. Perhaps deep down she was warm-hearted after all, hardened on the exterior under pressure. I trust you realize by now that the Moth is a dastardly bunch. I was still coping with the idea that a variety of people across the city all hated the group I had dedicated myself to, while unknowing of such a possibility. I suppose people will turn to anything that comes their way and claims to be in their best interests if it means suiting themselves. But I was not so quick to make a turn to this cause that rose from the shadows. If you say you are not like them, then they are not like you. But enough chit-chat. Before it gets any late, I need to see to the rest of our members. I hardly touched my plate while at the dinner table, which saved more for Otis. Carol's face beamed with wonder throughout the evening while I was estranged, but I wasn't the only one unenthusiastic. Though Otis was finally able to reunite with his sister, and while he put on a smile when he could be Although Otis was finally able to reunite with his sister, and while he put on a smile when he could, he didn't strike me as being as cheery as I had come to expect of him. Even when I freed him from the prison, he was lively, but tonight he seemed solemn. The bedroom that Otis and I stood in now had a warm glow provided by a lamp on the nightshade. Besides the bed in the corner, the one window would provide a view of only an outside wall, a few feet away, if the window weren't covered by blinds. As much as I wanted to be elsewhere, this room was the most hospitable in the base, providing the faintest comfort even with its grungy brick walls and wooden framework, not unlike the rest of the building. What mattered was that this room's seclusion allowed for privacy. Melanie had an eye for maintaining the aesthetics of the interior of even a building as decrepit as this. At least the bed was neatly made, and there was a soft rug underneath us. That faint comfort and the feeling that the day finally came to an end is what made it right to shed a tear again. I quietly sobbed, though refrained from releasing everything with Otis as my witness. Glancing at him from the side, he looked me right in the eye. You seem so sad all this time. I don't know how Melanie feels, but this is why I opted to hang out with you tonight instead. Do you even care? I know you want me to care as much as you do. That statement may have been partially true. For whatever reason, I still couldn't bring myself to reject this young man. Or perhaps this monster who I hoped was a man. I read your mind. Can't do it all the time. But the option's there after eating flesh. That's why let me give you your wish. Your thoughts were like a violent storm, but I saw good things among them. Your feelings were clashing. It made me worried, and ashamed I couldn't do much for you. But you really cared about Noah. I don't know if I've ever seen something like that in a while. You're a surprisingly generous person, Account, but I had a feeling something was different about you when I met you. I wasn't sure you let me go with you, but I was fortunate you did. It was a good pep talk, but it couldn't bring back Noah. Although, when I saw you the other night, as much as I didn't know about you at the time, I was able to take just a deep enough look to know for certain that you aren't a bad person. Something fell off when he happened to repeat a part of my own thoughts that night, but I dismissed that as a coincidence at the time. Then that meant if not Carol, someone else may have already fallen victim to him in vain, not long before I met him. I scared you, didn't I? I hope you're not still afraid of me. Don't worry about it, you're fine. My voice began to crack. I was quick to give him reassurance because, although he still frightened me, I had no one else to confide in, and didn't want to be left behind again. Hey, come here. He took a few steps towards me. A soft sensation enveloped my body. I shook all the more as he leaned forward and wrapped his arms around me. A moment passed and he spoke into my ear. A part of you wants this, isn't that right? That's right. If not from Noah, from someone. All of my tears flowed forth as I returned his embrace. It wasn't until his hands brushed up and down against my back that I felt my tension melt away. Though I choked as I continued to cry, I clung to him with all my strength in hopes of mitigating my pain as much as possible. Eventually, that emotion came to pass, as I realized I felt the first true relief of the day. My trembling ceased as I stood motionless and sunk into him, unable to let go. I said I'll make your wish come true, so I'm gonna stay by your side. Took a moment to loosen my grasp and look him in the eyes. He held the plain, innocent, gentle expression, more soothing than any smile he gave me before. Have you done this before? He returned his head to my shoulder. I only remember a time when I was younger that Melanie held me like this. Of course, there was another person who gave me a strong dislike. Though I was never sure what Noah's intent, which made me hesitant to reciprocate anything. I was afraid of my own affection might have been too strong for him, thus gone unreciprocated in turn. Maybe a time or two, but not like this. Otis' embrace gave me more than I would have ever thought I'd receive. My tears were finally dried, though the memories of the day still lingered, and so I began to wonder again what it would feel like if Noah were still there for me. Although as I was now, I was able to dismiss that thought just enough to focus on reality before me. For just once, reality was good. In beautiful cruelty, I received what I wanted from who I wouldn't have first wanted it from. A monster or not, he was kind to me. I broke away from his grasp and stepped away, though he then snatched one of my hands in both of his. I bet you're tired. You don't have to stop here. How about I help you fall asleep?